Some people have 5,000 friends, and nobody to call when their world falls apart. Their phone lights up all day. Notifications, likes, comments, messages from people they barely know. But when the room goes quiet at night, there's no voice waiting on the other side of the line. Maybe this is you right now, scrolling through photos of smiling faces, group dinners, weekend trips, while your own apartment feels a little too quiet. The strange thing about modern loneliness is this: you can be surrounded by people online and still feel completely invisible. And one delivery driver in Chicago discovered that truth the hardest way possible. His name was John Hill. At first, he thought the problem was everyone else. He had thousands of followers, yet not one real connection. But what happened next, nobody expected. John Hill was 29 years old and worked nights delivering food across the west side of Chicago. His car was a faded silver Toyota with a cracked dashboard and a phone mount that barely held together with duct tape. The screen of his phone had a spiderweb crack across the corner, but it still lit up constantly. Instagram notifications, TikTok comments, DMs from strangers. John had 4,872 followers, but most mornings he ate breakfast alone. That morning it was a gas station sandwich and cold coffee from a paper cup. He sat in the driver's seat parked on Ashland Avenue, engine off, Chicago wind rattling the car doors. His biggest flaw wasn't laziness. It was pride. John hated looking weak. If something bothered him, he hid it behind sarcasm or jokes online. His posts made his life look busy. Photos with customers, late-night city lights, captions like, "Another night chasing goals." But the truth was simpler. John avoided real people because he feared judgment. Years earlier, his father had walked out. His mother, Linda, worked double shifts as a nurse's assistant and recently started chemotherapy. John promised her something one night in the hospital hallway. "I'll take care of things," he said quietly. But instead of building real connections, John built an online persona. Followers were easier. Followers didn't ask hard questions. Followers didn't see through the act. So night after night, John drove through glowing streets delivering burgers, tacos, sushi. And when he parked outside his apartment on West Adams Street, the only light waiting inside was the one from his phone screen. One night in November, the temperature dropped below freezing. John had just finished a delivery to a high-rise building downtown. Inside the lobby, people were laughing, for friends gathered around a small table with coffee cups and winter coats draped over chairs. John noticed something simple. They were talking without phones. One guy said something that made the whole table burst into laughter. John stood there for a moment longer than necessary, watching, feeling something tighten in his chest. Then his phone buzzed. A notification. "Your post reached 3,000 people today." John stared at it. 3,000 people saw his post. Yet he couldn't think of one person he could call at 1 a.m. if something went wrong. Later that night, he drove to the hospital to drop off food for his mother. The hallway smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. Linda was half asleep in the bed when he walked in. She opened her eyes slowly. "John, you look tired." "I'm good," he said quickly. She studied his face. Then she said something that hit harder than he expected. "Baby, when was the last time you spent time with a real friend?" John laughed it off. "I talk to people all day online." His mother shook her head gently. "That's not the same." The room went quiet. Machines hummed softly beside her bed. And for the first time in years, John felt something he couldn't scroll past. Loneliness. Not the quiet kind. The heavy kind. The kind that forces you to admit something in your life isn't working. That night, sitting in his car outside the hospital, John whispered one sentence to himself. "Okay, enough." A week later, John picked up an early morning delivery. The sky was still dark, the city barely waking up. The address led him to a small bakery that smelled like warm cinnamon and fresh bread. Inside, an older man stood behind the counter wiping flour from his hands. John handed over the delivery bag. The man smiled. "Morning. Rough night." John shrugged. "Same as always." The man introduced himself. "Name's Daniel." He owned the bakery and had been opening the shop every morning at 5 a.m. for 30 years. John noticed something strange. People kept walking in. A construction worker, a nurse, college student, and each one greeted Daniel like an old friend. "Morning, Dan. Coffee ready?" "Same as yesterday?" John waited near the door watching. These weren't followers. These were real relationships. Daniel looked over and said casually, "You ever notice something?" John frowned. "What?" Daniel nodded toward John's phone. "People spend hours talking online, but forget to show up in the same room." John didn't respond, but the sentence stuck. Later that morning, John looked up a statistic while sitting in his car. It said the average person spends over 2 hours a day on social media. 2 hours. That's 730 hours a year. Almost an entire month of waking life spent staring at a screen. John leaned back in his seat. He realized something uncomfortable. He had spent years building an audience, but never building a circle. So John made a quiet decision. He started showing up at Daniel's bakery every morning after his night shift. Not for followers, just for coffee and conversation. At first, it felt awkward. John sat silently at the corner table while regulars talked about work, sports, weather. He didn't know how to join in. Weeks passed. One morning Daniel asked him, "You always this quiet?" John shrugged. "Just listening." But slowly things shifted. A construction worker named Luis started greeting him. "Morning, delivery guy." A nurse named Hannah shared a joke about night shifts. John even laughed once. For the first time in years, the mornings felt lighter. Then one night, everything almost collapsed. John got a call from the hospital. His mother's condition had worsened. He rushed there at 2 a.m., heart racing. Hours passed in a cold waiting room. For a moment, John grabbed his phone. Instinctively, he opened social media. Thousands of followers. But none of them knew where he was. None of them knew he was scared. John stared at the screen. Then he closed the app. And something surprising happened. He remembered Daniel, and Luis, and Hannah. John hesitated. Then he sent one simple message in their group chat. "Hey, rough night. At the hospital." 5 minutes later, his phone buzzed. Luis replied first. "Stay strong, man." Then Hannah. "I'm nearby. Need coffee." John stared at the messages. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone. Change didn't happen overnight. John still worked long delivery shifts, still drove through rainy nights and silent streets. But his mornings looked different now. At dawn, the sky above Chicago slowly turning orange, John would walk into Daniel's bakery. The bell above the door rang softly. Coffee steamed in the air. Bread crackled in the oven. "Morning, John," Daniel would say. John started helping around the shop, wiping tables, carrying flour bags. Nothing big, just small actions. One day Luis invited him to a weekend basketball game. John almost refused. Old habits, fear of awkward silence. But he chose differently. "Yeah," he said, "I'll come." That Saturday he showed up at a cracked outdoor court surrounded by chain-link fences. The game was messy. John missed easy shots. Everyone laughed. But it felt good. Real laughter. No filters. No comments section. John slowly reduced his time online. 2 hours a day turned into 30 minutes. Then 15. He stopped posting daily updates. Instead, he started showing up in real places. Something surprising happened. The loneliness didn't disappear instantly, but it cracked. And through that crack, connection started to grow. 1 year later, John still delivered food at night. But his life looked different. The cracked phone screen was replaced. The apartment on West Adams Street felt warmer. His mother's treatment had improved, and she smiled more often during visits. But the biggest change wasn't money. It was people. On a Saturday morning, the bakery buzzed with noise. Luis argued about basketball scores. Hannah laughed at something Daniel said. John stood behind the counter pouring coffee for customers. "Look at you," Daniel joked. "From delivery driver to assistant baker." John smiled. For the first time in years, his phone sat quietly in his pocket. No need for constant notifications, because something better had replaced them. Real voices, real friendships, real presence. John had thousands of followers once, but now he had for people he could call anytime, and that was enough. Loneliness in modern life rarely comes from being alone. It comes from being surrounded by noise without real connection. John discovered something simple most people overlook. If you spend 2 hours a day online, that's 730 hours a year. Imagine using even a fraction of that time to sit with real people, to show up somewhere regularly, to say hello, to listen. That's exactly what John did. Not a dramatic transformation, just small choices repeated every day. One coffee, one conversation, one morning at a time. So here's something you can do tonight. Text one person you trust and ask them to meet for coffee this week. Not someday, this week. And in the comments, answer this honestly. When was the last time you had a real conversation without looking at your phone? Because sometimes the difference between feeling invisible and feeling connected is simply deciding to show up. And maybe this story was meant for you.